The wind whistled through the bare branches of the oak trees that lined my property as I stood on the porch of the farmhouse I'd called home for 43 years. My arthritic hands gripped the weathered railing, knuckles white with tension. At 68, I'd weathered many storms in my life: the death of my beloved wife Margaret 12 years ago, the recession of '08 that nearly wiped out my construction business, even the cancer scare 5 years back. But nothing had prepared me for the betrayal brewing within the walls of my own home, orchestrated by the very people I'd sacrificed everything for. My name is Robert Mitchell. I built Mitchell Construction from nothing but a used pickup truck, a toolbox, and an unrelenting work ethic that kept me away from home more hours than I care to admit. What began as odd jobs and small renovations grew into one of the most respected commercial construction companies in Connecticut. My calloused hands had raised skyscrapers in Hartford, renovated historic buildings in New Haven, and built schools across the state. Every dollar earned was a dollar invested in the business, in this 200-acre property, in my family's future. Dad, be reasonable. The kids need their own space when they visit. My son David's voice from behind me broke through my thoughts. At 42, he had my height and build, but none of my patience or appreciation for honest work. He joined the family business straight out of college. My biggest mistake. I should have made him earn his position instead of handing it to him. I turned slowly, my knee aching from the cold. Your kids have plenty of space. 5 bedrooms in this house, plus the guest cottage. I gestured toward the smaller building visible through the trees. What more do they need? David sighed. That condescending sound I'd grown to hate. It's not just about space. It's about modernizing. This place is, well, it's outdated. We could subdivide the property, build some luxury homes. The location is perfect. No. The word came out harder than I intended, but I meant it. This land stays intact. Your mother and I agreed on that. Mom's been gone for 12 years, Dad. His voice softened, using Margaret's memory like a weapon. Times change. You're sitting on a gold mine here. And for what? To keep farming Christmas trees nobody wants to buy anymore? I stared at him, wondering when he'd become this person. When had the boy who used to help me plant saplings every spring turned into this stranger who saw only dollar signs where I saw legacy? This discussion is over, I said, turning to go back inside. The land stays as it is, and so does the company structure. This last comment made him flinch. He knew what I meant. For months he'd been pushing to sell our commercial division and focus solely on luxury residential development. Easier money, he claimed. Less hassle, more profit. But that wasn't what Mitchell Construction stood for. We built things that lasted, structures that served communities, not showcase homes for the wealthy that would be torn down and rebuilt in 20 years when styles changed. You're being stubborn, Dad. The board meeting is next week, and I'm bringing this proposal forward whether you like it or not. I almost laughed. I still own 60% of the company, son. Good luck with that. The screen door slammed behind me as I entered the warmth of the kitchen. Sarah, David's wife, was there with their children, my grandchildren. Michael was 16 now, tall and constantly hunched over his phone. Jessica was 12, still young enough to give me a genuine smile as I entered. "Grandpa," she exclaimed, jumping up to hug me. Her arms wrapped around my waist, and for a moment everything felt right in the world. "There's my girl," I said, unpatting her head. "How's school going?" "It's okay. I got an A on my history project about the Industrial Revolution. I used some of the old photos you gave me of construction sites from when you started your business." My heart swelled. "That's wonderful, sweetheart." Michael didn't even look up from his phone. Sarah gave me a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. She'd never approved of me, always thought David deserved more than I'd given him. What she didn't understand was that I'd given him everything, just not all at once. There was value in earning your way. "Is everything okay out there?" Sarah asked. Glancing toward the porch where David remained. "Fine," I replied, not wanting to get into it in front of the kids, "just discussing business." Again? Michael finally looked up, rolling his eyes. That's all you guys ever talk about? Old buildings and dirt? I bit back a sharp response. The boy had no idea what old buildings and dirt had provided for him. The private school education, the fancy sports camps, the college fund that would let him graduate debt-free. Sarah placed a hand on his shoulder. Michael, show some respect. He shrugged. Whatever. Grandpa's business is ancient history anyway. Dad says, Michael! Sarah cut him off sharply, shooting him a warning look. My stomach tightened. What does your father say? An uncomfortable silence filled the kitchen. Jessica looked between us, sensing the tension. Sarah busied herself with the dishes in the sink. Nothing, Michael muttered, returning to his phone. But I knew better. David had been talking to the kids about my business, my life's work, dismissing it as obsolete, poisoning them against everything I'd built. I think I'll lie down for a bit before dinner, I said, needing to escape the suddenly suffocating kitchen. No one objected, as I made my way upstairs to the master bedroom. Closing the door behind me, I sank onto the edge of the bed Margaret and I had shared for nearly 4 decades. Her absence still felt raw some days. She would have known how to handle this situation with David. She always knew what to say, how to bridge the gaps that seemed to be widening between us. I opened the nightstand drawer and pulled out a worn leather journal, Margaret's diary from her final year. I didn't read it often, but sometimes her words were the only thing that could center me. I flipped to an entry from shortly before her cancer took a turn for the worse. Robert doesn't see what I see in David. The impatience, the entitlement. I worry what will happen when I'm gone. Robert built everything on integrity and hard work. But David wants the rewards without the effort. I've tried to talk to him, but he dismisses me. Times are different, Mum, he says, but greed and shortcuts never go out of style. I pray Robert will be strong enough to protect what we've built when I'm no longer here to help him. My eyes burned as I closed the journal. Margaret had seen it coming all those years ago. She'd tried to warn me, but I hadn't wanted to believe it. I'd kept telling myself that David would mature, that he'd eventually understand the value of what we'd created. A soft knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. "Grandpa, can I come in?" Jessica's voice. "Of course, sweetheart," I called, quickly returning the journal to its drawer. She entered hesitantly, her young face troubled. "Are you mad at Dad?" I patted the bed beside me, and she came to sit down. "Your dad and I have different ideas about some things. That doesn't mean I'm mad at him. He talks about your house and land a lot," she said, looking down at her hands. "He says it's worth millions, but you won't do anything with it." The innocence with which she delivered this knife to my heart was almost unbearable. "What do you think I should do with it?" I asked gently. She looked up, surprised to be asked her opinion. "I like it the way it is. I love coming here. Michael says it's boring, but I like helping you with the Christmas trees and collecting eggs from the chickens." She paused. "Dad says when you're gone, he's going to sell everything and build a mansion with a pool and a tennis court." My blood ran cold. "Does he say that often?" She nodded. "He shows Mom pictures on his iPad. They have these drawings of what it could look like. There's no room for the trees or your workshop in the pictures." I put my arm around her small shoulders. "Thank you for telling me, Jessica." "Am I in trouble?" she asked worriedly. "Not at all. You did nothing wrong." I squeezed her gently. "Your grandma Margaret used to say that truth is the foundation of trust. You told me the truth, and I trust you all the more for it." She smiled, relieved. "I miss Grandma, even though I was little when she died. I miss her too every day." I gazed out the window at the land that had been our shared dream. "She helped plant many of those trees, you know." "Really? Which ones?" "The big ones along the north fence. We planted those the year your dad was born." Jessica seemed to consider this. "So they're as old as Dad?" "That's right. Some things take a lifetime to grow properly." I couldn't help the double meaning in my words. "Dinner's ready," Sarah's voice called from downstairs. Jessica hopped up. "Coming!" She paused at the door. "Are you coming down, Grandpa?" "I'll be there in a minute," I promised. After she left, I stood at the window, looking out over the property that David was already parceling up in his mind. The trees Margaret and I had planted together, the workshop where I'd taught David to use tools when he was just a boy, the pond where we'd ice skated in winter, all of it reduced to dollar signs in my son's eyes. Something shifted inside me, a resolve that had been missing since Margaret died. I wouldn't let this happen. Not while I had breath in my body. But I needed to be smart about it. David clearly had been planning behind my back for some time. I needed to find out exactly what I was up against. Dinner was a tense affair. David made strained small talk about the Patriots' chances this season, while Sarah served a roast that was slightly overdone. Michael remained glued to his phone until Sarah insisted he put it away, at which point he sullenly pushed food around his plate. Only Jessica seemed genuinely interested in conversation, chattering about school and friends. "So, Dad," David said casually as Sarah served coffee and store-bought apple pie that couldn't compare to Margaret's homemade version, "I've been thinking about your estate planning. Have you updated your will since Mom passed?" Sarah shot him a warning look, but he ignored it. "My affairs are in order," I replied neutrally. "Why do you ask?" He shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant. "Just thinking ahead. You're not getting any younger. And with the company and property, there's a lot at stake. We should make sure everything transfers smoothly when the time comes." "Transfers smoothly," I repeated, setting down my coffee cup. "To you, I presume." "Well, I am your only child," he said with a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. "And I'm already running most of the business anyway. Were it not for Jessica's presence, I might have called him out on that blatant lie. I was still in the office 4 days a week, still oversaw major projects, still signed every significant contract. "Let's discuss this another time," I said instead, noticing Jessica's discomfort. Sure, David agreed easily, too easily. No rush. Just something to think about. But there was a rush, apparently. After dinner, as I was helping Jessica with her math homework in the study, I overheard David and Sarah talking in the hallway. They clearly thought I couldn't hear them over the television playing in the living room where Michael sat. "We need to move faster," Sarah was saying. "Henderson says the zoning board is becoming more restrictive. If we wait too long, we might not get approval for the full development." "I know," David replied, frustration evident in his voice, "but the old man won't budge, and the company bylaws give him control until he either steps down or dies." "What about the other option?" Sarah asked, her voice dropping. "Bringing in Coastal Development as a partner, it's risky. Dad would see it as a betrayal." Sarah's laugh was cold. "Because it is one, but it might be the only way. They have the capital to buy out the other shareholders. Once you have control—" I know, but I'd rather do this without burning bridges. Dad will come around eventually." "Will he? He's as stubborn now as he was 20 years ago. Meanwhile, we're stuck in that cramped house while he rattles around in this museum to your mother." Their voices moved away, but I'd heard enough. Not only was David planning to sell my land out from under me, but he was also conspiring to wrest control of my company through some deal with Coastal Development, one of our competitors, known for buying smaller construction firms, stripping their assets, and discarding the remains. Jessica looked up from her homework, concerned. "Grandpa, are you okay? Your face looks funny." I forced a smile. "Just a little heartburn from your mom's roast. Nothing to worry about." But there was plenty to worry about. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat in my study with a glass of bourbon, something I rarely indulged in anymore. Margaret had always said it made me melancholy. She was right, as usual, but tonight I needed the clarity that came with facing hard truths. David wasn't just dreaming about what he'd do when I died someday, in the distant future. He was actively plotting to take everything I'd built, everything Margaret and I had created together. Our legacy was nothing but a cash cow to him, ready for slaughter. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in months. "Robert?" Frank Sullivan's voice was alert despite the late hour. As my attorney for over 30 years, he was used to my occasional urgent calls. "Everything all right?" "No," I said simply. "I need to see you. I need to... First thing tomorrow. It's about David." Frank's silence spoke volumes. He'd warned me years ago about giving David too much control too quickly. "I'll clear my morning," he said finally. "Be at my office at 8. "Thank you." I hesitated, then added, "And Frank, bring Harold too. I think we're going to need an accountant's eye on this." "That bad?" "Worse than you think." After hanging up, I sat in the darkness of my study, listening to the old house creak and settle. David and his family were sleeping under my roof, eating my food, all while plotting to dismantle everything I cherished. The irony was bitter as the bourbon in my glass. I'd made many mistakes in my life, but none as devastating as misjudging my own son. Tomorrow I would begin to correct that mistake. David thought I was just a foolish old man, too sentimental to see the opportunity he saw. He was about to learn that this old dog still had some teeth. Morning came too quickly. I was up before dawn, moving quietly through the house as I made coffee and prepared to leave. I left a note saying I had business in town and would be back for dinner. No need to alert David to my suspicions yet. The drive to Hartford took just under an hour, the familiar route giving me time to organize my thoughts. Frank's office was in a building I'd renovated 15 years ago, one of our most prestigious projects. The doorman nodded respectfully as I entered. At least someone still valued what I'd built. Frank and Harold were waiting in the conference room, concern evident on their faces. "You look like hell, Robert," Frank said bluntly as I took a seat. "Feels appropriate," I replied, setting my briefcase on the table. "I've discovered my son is planning to stab me in the back." Over the next hour, I laid out everything. The conversations I'd overheard, Jessica's innocent revelations, the mounting evidence that David was maneuvering to seize control of both my company and my property. Harold took meticulous notes, while Frank's expression grew increasingly grim. "The board meeting next week," Frank said thoughtfully. "That's when he plans to make his move with Coastal." "I believe so. He mentioned bringing forward a proposal, regardless of my objections." Harold adjusted his glasses. "I've been reviewing the quarterly reports. There are some irregularities in the luxury development division David oversees." My stomach clenched. "What kind of irregularities?" "Nothing overtly illegal, but concerning. Resources being allocated to projects that aren't officially on the books. Consultancy fees to companies I can't trace. It's possible he's already laying groundwork with Coastal." "Can we prove it?" I asked. Frank sighed. "Not yet, but we can start by protecting what's yours." He opened a folder. "I've drafted several documents. First, a revision to your will that explicitly prevents the sale or subdivision of your property for 25 years after your death." "Good," I nodded. "What else?" "A corporate restructuring that removes David as heir apparent to the CEO position, replacing him with a board-selected successor, and a trust that controls your shares in the event of your incapacitation or death, with trustees who will follow your explicit wishes." Harold leaned forward. "We should also conduct a full audit of the luxury division. If David has been misappropriating company resources, do it," I said firmly. No stone unturned. Frank studied me carefully. "Robert, are you sure about this? Once we start down this path..." "My son has already chosen the path," I replied, my voice steady despite the ache in my chest. "He's planning to destroy everything Margaret and I built. I won't stand by and let that happen." We spent the rest of the morning outlining a strategy. By noon, I had signed numerous documents and authorized the audit. Frank promised to have everything ready for the board meeting. As I prepared to leave, he placed a hand on my shoulder. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry it's come to this. I know how much you wanted David to carry on your legacy." I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. The legacy wasn't just buildings and land, it was values, principles, a way of doing business with integrity. Somewhere along the way, I'd failed to instill those in my son. The drive home was even longer than the journey in. I stopped at a diner Margaret and I used to frequent. needing the comfort of familiar surroundings. The waitress recognized me despite my infrequent visits. "Mr. Mitchell, it's been ages, the usual." "Please, Doris." I managed a smile. "How's that grandson of yours doing at UConn?" Her face lit up. "Graduating this spring. That scholarship from your foundation made all the difference." The Mitchell Educational Foundation, another initiative David saw as a waste of company resources. We provided scholarships to children of construction workers, funded trade school programs, supported vocational training in underserved communities. Margaret had been passionate about it, believing that education was the key to opportunity. "I'm glad to hear it," I said sincerely. "We need more good engineers in this world." As I ate my club sandwich, still made exactly how I liked it after all these years, I scrolled through emails on my phone. One from Jessica's school caught my eye. They were seeking volunteers for Career Day next month. Without hesitation, I replied, offering to speak about construction and engineering. Some legacies couldn't be measured in dollars. Some were built one young mind at a time. When I arrived home, the house was empty except for Mrs. Gonzalez, a housekeeper of 20 years, who was dusting in the living room. "Where is everyone?" I asked, hanging up my coat. "Mr. David took Mrs. Sarah and the children to look at boarding schools for Michael," she replied. "They left right after breakfast." Boarding schools. This was the first I'd heard of it. Michael had always attended the local private day school, another decision being made without my knowledge. "Did they say when they'd be back?" "For dinner, senor. Mrs. Sarah asked me to prepare the roast chicken you like." At least they were making an effort to butter me up. "Thank you, Elena. I'll be in my workshop if anyone needs me." My workshop had always been my sanctuary. A converted barn filled with tools, wood, and half-finished projects. I'd built furniture for the house here, toys for David when he was a boy, later for the grandchildren. The scent of sawdust and varnish was more comforting than any cologne. I settled at my workbench, but instead of picking up tools, I opened my laptop. Time to do some investigating of my own. David wasn't the only one who could plan in secret. First, I logged into the company's project management system using my executive access, something David probably assumed I rarely did. I navigated to the luxury division's files, scanning recent projects. Nothing seemed overtly suspicious until I noticed a development labeled Evergreen Heights, with a location that made me pause. It was adjacent to my property. The proposed development showed high-end homes arranged around a central amenity area with a clubhouse, pool, and tennis courts, exactly what Jessica had described from David's iPad. But Mitchell Construction didn't own that land. We had no projects planned there, unless David was already counting my property as part of the development. Digging deeper, I found communication with local zoning officials about a potential large-scale development that would transform the area with luxury living options. The preliminary discussions had begun 8 months ago. My hands shook with anger. 8 months. While he'd been sitting at my dinner table, playing with his children in my yard, my son had been plotting to bulldoze everything I cherished. Further searching revealed communications with Coastal Development Group, veiled in careful language, but the intent was clear. They were discussing a strategic partnership that would unlock value in underutilized assets. My company, my land, all reduced to assets needing unlocking. I printed key documents, then logged out. Evidence secured, I turned to another task, understanding exactly what David stood to gain financially from this betrayal. By the time I heard cars in the driveway, I had a much clearer picture. Based on the projected returns for Evergreen Heights and the proposed buyout structure with Coastal, David stood to make approximately $14 million if his plan succeeded. Enough to build that mansion he'd been designing, with plenty left over for private school tuitions and whatever else his heart desired. All it would cost him was his father's life's work and his mother's memory. I tucked the papers away and washed my hands, preparing to face my son and his family with newfound knowledge. The board meeting was in 4 days. By then, I would be ready. Dinner that evening was surreal. David was animated, discussing the boarding school they'd visited, Westfield Academy, one of the most exclusive in New England. Michael actually seemed engaged for once, describing the sports facilities with genuine enthusiasm. "The hockey program is incredible, Grandpa," he said. "NHL scouts come to their games." "Sounds impressive," I replied, carefully cutting my chicken. "But isn't it late to be applying for next year? Most prestigious schools have long waiting lists." David and Sarah exchanged glances. "We've been on their radar for a while," David said smoothly. "One of our clients is on the board of trustees. He thinks Michael has a good chance of getting in." "I see." I took a sip of water. "That must be expensive. Westfield is what, 60,000 a year?" 65, Sarah corrected, then looked uncomfortable. "But it's worth it for Michael's future." "Of course," I agreed mildly. "Education is always a worthwhile investment, though I'm surprised you can afford it on your current salary." "David," a flash of annoyance crossed his face, "we manage our money carefully, Dad. Besides, the company is doing well. I expect significant growth in the coming year." "I bet you do," I thought, but merely nodded. Jessica, who had been quiet, suddenly asked, "If Michael goes to boarding school, will I have to go too?" "Not yet, sweetheart," Sarah replied, "but we've been looking at some wonderful girls' schools for when you're a bit older." "I don't want to go away," Jessica said firmly. "I want to stay near Grandpa and help with the Christmas trees." David's laugh was dismissive. "You'll change your mind when you see these schools. Jess, they have horseback riding, tennis, all kinds of activities you'd love." "I like the activities I have now," she insisted, looking at me for support. I winked at her. "The trees and I would miss you terribly, but that's a discussion for another day." I turned to David. "Speaking of the company, I spent some time reviewing the luxury division's projects today." David froze, with his fork halfway to his mouth. "Oh? Any particular reason?" "Just keeping up with things. I noticed a project called Evergreen Heights. Interesting location, right next to my property." Sarah's eyes widened slightly. David recovered quickly. "It's just preliminary research. The adjacent land came on the market, and I thought it was worth exploring. Nothing concrete." I took another bite of chicken. The zoning application seemed pretty detailed for nothing concrete. A tense silence fell over the table. Michael looked between his father and me, suddenly alert to the undercurrents. Jessica seemed confused. "Perhaps we should discuss this later," David suggested, with a pointed look at the children. "You're right," I agreed. "Business talk isn't appropriate for dinner. My apologies." The remainder of the meal passed in strained conversation. As soon as dessert was finished, Sarah hurried the children upstairs for showers and homework. David remained at the table, nursing a glass of my good scotch. "So," he said once we were alone, "you've been snooping through my division's files." "Snooping implies I don't have the right to access them," I replied calmly. "I'm still CEO of Mitchell Construction. Nothing in the company is off-limits to me." He leaned back, studying me. "Dad, I can explain Evergreen Heights. It's an opportunity to build luxury homes on land you don't own, land that happens to be my property, the property your mother and I built our lives on." His expression hardened. "You're being sentimental about dirt and trees. This development could net the company millions. Your 200 acres combined with the Henderson parcel next door would create the most exclusive community in the county. So you've already been discussing my land in your plans. Land I've made very clear is not for sale or development." David sighed dramatically. "Dad, be realistic. You're one man living on 200 acres. It's wasteful. The market is hot right now. We, I interrupted, or you and Coastal Development." His eyes narrowed. "You know about that too. I know you've been negotiating with our competitors behind my back. I know you've been making promises about assets you don't control. I know you've been lying to me for at least 8 months while plotting to dismantle everything your mother and I built." "It's not like that," he protested, but his eyes wouldn't meet mine. Coastal has resources we don't. This partnership would take Mitchell Construction to the next level by destroying its foundation, by abandoning the principles it was built on. He slammed his glass down. Principals don't pay for Michael's hockey equipment or Jessica's dance lessons. Principals don't buy the house in the right neighborhood or get the kids into the right schools. No, I agreed quietly. Those things require hard work, patience, and sometimes sacrifice, all qualities your mother and I tried to teach you. Don't bring Mom into this, he snapped. She's been gone for 12 years. The world has changed. Has it? Has integrity gone out of style? Has keeping your word become obsolete? Has family loyalty expired? He had the grace to look uncomfortable. It's not personal, Dad. It's business. I stood up slowly, my old knees protesting. That's where you're wrong, son. It's both, and you've failed at both. As I turned to leave, he called after me, "The board meeting is Tuesday. I'm presenting the Coastal Partnership proposal whether you like it or not. Several board members already support it." I paused but didn't turn around. "Then Tuesday will be interesting, won't it?" I spent Sunday and Monday preparing. Frank and Harold had been working overtime, gathering documentation and preparing counter-proposals. The audit of the luxury division had turned up several concerning transactions, nothing overtly illegal, but enough evidence of mismanagement to raise serious questions about David's leadership. On Monday evening, I called an old friend, James Wilson, who had been my foreman on some of our earliest projects and now served on our board of directors. James had been quiet in recent meetings, and I suspected David might have been courting his vote. "Jim," I said when he answered, "we need to talk about tomorrow's meeting." His hesitation confirmed my suspicions. "Robert, David's proposal has some merit. The market for luxury developments. Jim, how long have we known each other? 30 years. Have I ever steered the company wrong?" Another pause. "No, you've always had good instincts." "Then trust them one more time. Come to the meeting early tomorrow. I want to show you something before David arrives." He agreed, albeit reluctantly. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my study, reviewing documents until the words blurred. Around midnight, a soft knock at the door startled me. "Grandpa." Jessica stood in the doorway in her pajamas, clutching the stuffed bear I'd given her for her 8th birthday. I had a bad dream. I set aside the papers. "Come here, sweetheart." She climbed onto my lap, something she hadn't done in years. At 12, she was getting too old for such things, but tonight she seemed to need the comfort. "Want to talk about your dream?" I asked, smoothing her hair. "Everyone was fighting," she said quietly. "You and Dad were yelling, and Mom was crying, and Michael was saying mean things, and then you went away and never came back." My heart clenched. Children always sensed more than adults gave them credit for. That sounds scary, but it was just a dream. "But you and Dad are fighting, aren't you? About the house and the company." I sighed. No point lying to her. "We have different ideas about the future. Sometimes that happens in families. Are you going to go away?" "No." "Jess, this is my home. I'm not going anywhere." She was quiet for a moment. "Dad says you're being selfish, that you could make everyone rich if you just did what he wants. The directness of children could be breathtaking sometimes. Do you think having more money would make everyone happier?" She considered this seriously. "Michael thinks so. He wants the new PlayStation and to go to hockey camp and stuff. Mom wants a bigger house. Dad wants, I don't know, to be the boss, I guess." "And what do you want, Jessica?" Her answer was immediate. "I want everyone to stop fighting. I want to still come here and help with the Christmas trees. I want you to teach me more woodworking like you promised." I hugged her tightly. "Those sound like very reasonable wants to me." "Grandpa?" Her voice was muffled against my shoulder. "Are you rich? Dad says you have millions, but you're too stubborn to spend it." I chuckled despite myself. "By some standards, Yes, I suppose I am wealthy, but money has never been what mattered most to me." I pulled back to look at her. "Your grandmother used to say that true wealth is measured in moments, not dollars. The moment you were born, the moment you took your first steps, The moment you proudly showed me the birdhouse we built together." She smiled at the memory. "It was crooked. Perfectly crooked," I corrected, "just the way birds like it." After I tucked Jessica back into bed, I returned to my study with renewed determination. Tomorrow would be difficult, but necessary. I would protect what mattered, not just for my sake, but for Jessica's as well, for the grandchild who still valued moments over money. Tuesday morning arrived with the clarity I hadn't felt in months. I dressed carefully in my best suit, charcoal grey, tailored, with the blue tie Margaret had given me for our last anniversary together. David and his family had returned to their home the previous evening, so I had the house to myself as I prepared for the confrontation ahead. I arrived at the company headquarters an hour before the scheduled meeting. James Wilson was waiting in the parking lot, as promised, looking uncomfortable. "Robert," he greeted me with a handshake, "I've given some more thought to our conversation. Let's talk inside," I suggested, leading him to my office. For the next 45 minutes, I laid out everything: the audit findings, the secret negotiations with Coastal, the plans for my property that had been developed without my knowledge or consent. James's expression grew increasingly troubled. "I had no idea," he said finally. "David told me this was a mutual decision, that you were ready to step back and enjoy retirement. As you can see, that's far from the truth." I handed him one final document, a letter from Frank outlining the legal consequences if the board supported David's proposal without proper disclosure of his conflicts of interest. James sighed heavily. "You can count on my vote, Robert, and I'll speak to Gregory and Patricia. They should know the full picture before voting." By the time the boardroom began filling, I had secured promises of support from 3 of the 7 board members. David arrived last, briefcase in hand, looking confident. His expression faltered slightly when he saw me already seated at the head of the table. "Dad, I didn't expect you so early," he said, trying to maintain his composure. "I wouldn't miss this for the world," I replied pleasantly. "Please, let's begin." The meeting proceeded with routine matters first: quarterly financial reports, project updates, personnel changes. David kept glancing at his watch, clearly impatient to reach his agenda item. When it finally came, he stood and distributed glossy presentation folders to each board member. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began with practiced charm, "today I'm presenting an unprecedented opportunity for Mitchell Construction, a strategic partnership with Coastal Development Group that will position us at the forefront of luxury residential construction in New England." He launched into a well-rehearsed presentation, complete with projected revenue figures, market analyses, and architectural renderings. The proposed development, my land transformed into a sea of mansions, was the centerpiece. "The cornerstone of this partnership," David continued, "would be the Evergreen Heights development. By combining the Henderson property, which we have an option to purchase, with adjacent land, we create a canvas for the most exclusive community in the region." Patricia Chen, our CFO, raised her hand. "This adjacent land, is that the Mitchell family property?" David hesitated just long enough to be noticeable. "Yes, my father's land would be incorporated into the development. He would be generously compensated, of course." "Compensated," I echoed, speaking for the first time since his presentation began. "That implies I've agreed to sell." "I haven't." David forced a laugh. "Dad's being modest. We've discussed this extensively, and while he has some sentimental attachments to the property, he understands the tremendous opportunity it represents." "That's an interesting interpretation of our conversations," I said calmly. "Perhaps you'd like to share with the board exactly when I agreed to sell my home for your development?" The room grew uncomfortably quiet. David's confident smile faltered. "Well, we haven't finalized the details, but we haven't discussed it at all, except for me repeatedly telling you the property is not for sale. Not now, not ever." Gregory Barnes, our longest-serving board member, frowned. "David, are you presenting a development plan contingent on land you don't have access to?" "It's complicated," David hedged. "Dad and I have a difference of opinion on the best use of the land, but I'm confident we can come to an arrangement." "I see." I opened my own folder. "While we're discussing differences of opinion, perhaps we should address some other matters. Harold, would you join us, please?" On cue, Harold entered with additional folders, which he distributed to the board members. "What is this?" David demanded, his composure cracking. "The results of an audit of the luxury division's finances for the past year," I replied. "Harold, would you summarize the findings?" Harold adjusted his glasses nervously. "We found numerous irregularities. Resources allocated to unauthorized projects. Consultancy fees paid to shell companies that appear to be connected to executives at Coastal Development. Preliminary work on the Evergreen Heights project charged to other legitimate company projects to hide the expenses." David's face drained of color. This is a witch hunt. Dad ordered this audit without proper authorization because he's afraid of progress." "Actually," Frank interjected, having entered behind Harold, "as CEO and majority shareholder, Robert has every right to audit any division of the company. The bylaws are quite clear on that point." David looked around the table, seeing support slipping away. "This partnership is the future of Mitchell Construction. Without it, we'll be left behind while companies like Coastal dominate the market." "Is that what they promised you?" I asked quietly. "A seat at the table? A share of the profits? Because their track record suggests otherwise. Coastal has acquired 7 regional construction firms in the past decade. Know how many still operate under their original leadership? 0. Patricia was leafing through the audit report, her expression grim. "These financial discrepancies are serious, David. You've essentially been using company resources to court a competitor while hiding the expenses." "It wasn't like that," he protested, but his voice lacked conviction. I stood slowly. "Members of the board, I've served as CEO of Mitchell Construction for 43 years. In that time, we've built this company on a foundation of integrity, quality work, and community service. Today, I'm asking for your support in protecting that legacy." I distributed one final document. "This is a resolution removing David Mitchell from his position as Executive Vice President and head of the Luxury Division, effective immediately, pending a full investigation of the financial irregularities identified in the audit." David stared at me in shock. "You can't do this. I'm your son." "Yes, you are," I agreed, the weight of those words heavy in my chest, "which makes your betrayal all the more painful." The vote was unanimous, with even David's former supporters unable to ignore the evidence before them. As the meeting concluded, he remained seated, staring at the table, while the others filed out awkwardly. Only James paused to place a sympathetic hand on his shoulder before leaving us alone. "Why?" David asked finally, his voice hollow. "Why humiliate me like this? You could have talked to me privately. Like you talked to me about selling my home, about partnering with our competitors, about using company resources for your personal gain." I shook my head. "You made this public when you decided to bring your proposal to the board without my consent." He looked up, anger replacing shock. "So what happens now? You fire your only son and heir, destroy my career, for what? To prove a point?" "No, David. To protect what matters, the company your mother and I built, the land we loved, the principles we tried to teach you." I gathered my papers slowly. "What happens next is up to you. The investigation will proceed. If criminal charges are warranted, they'll be filed. If not, you'll be removed from the company with your shareholding intact, but no operational role. And you think you can run this company without me? At your age?" His laugh was bitter. "Good luck with that. The industry is changing. Your old-school approach is a dinosaur waiting for the meteor." I studied my son, this stranger wearing David's face. "I built this company from nothing when I was younger than you are now. I can certainly guide it through a transition at this stage. The board will appoint a new executive leadership team, and I'll step back into an advisory role within a year." "So that's it?" 42 years as your son, and you throw me away over a business disagreement? The question struck me like a physical blow. Is that how you see this? A business disagreement? You plotted to sell my home, the home where you grew up, where your mother is buried in the family plot behind the orchard. You conspired with competitors to seize control of my company. You misappropriated funds. You lied to my face for months. I paused, collecting myself. I'm not throwing you away, you. David, you walked away a long time ago. I just finally noticed. He stood abruptly, gathering his presentation materials. This isn't over. I still own 15% of the company. I have rights. Yes, you do. And I suggest you consult with an attorney about those rights, one who isn't also the company's counsel. Frank can't represent you in this matter. At the door, he turned back. Mom would be ashamed of you. It was a final, twisting knife, and he knew it. I kept my face impassive until he was gone, then sank into my chair, suddenly exhausted. Would Margaret be ashamed? I didn't think so. She had seen this coming before I had warned me in her journal. She would be heartbroken, certainly, but ashamed? No. She would have done the same to protect what we built. The aftermath was predictably messy. David hired an aggressive attorney who made various threats, but ultimately negotiated a separation agreement. He retained his shares, but resigned from all positions within the company. The investigation found numerous ethical violations, but nothing that warranted criminal charges. A small mercy. Sarah filed for divorce 6 months later, having decided that David, without his executive position and promised millions, wasn't the husband she'd signed up for. Michael, now at his prestigious boarding school, rarely came home. Jessica, however, still visited me regularly. It was during one such visit, nearly a year after the confrontation, that the true cost of my actions became clear to me. Jessica and I were in the workshop, building a dollhouse for her younger cousin, when she suddenly asked, "Do you and Dad hate each other now?" I set down my sanding block carefully. "No, Jess, I don't hate your father. I'm disappointed in his choices and hurt by his actions, but I don't hate him. He says you ruined his life." Her honesty was brutal. "He says you chose the company over your own son." "What do you think?" I asked, genuinely curious about her perspective. She considered this seriously, in that thoughtful way that reminded me so much of Margaret. "I think Dad wanted things the easy way. You always tell me that anything worth having takes hard work, out of the mouths of babes." "That's very insightful, Jessica. Will you and Dad ever be okay again?" I wished I could lie to her, give her hope for a reconciliation that seemed increasingly unlikely, but I respected her too much for that. "I don't know, sweetheart. I hope someday we can at least be civil. Family is important even when it's complicated." She nodded, accepting this uncomfortable truth. "I'm glad I still get to come here. Mom didn't want me to at first, but I told her I'd run away if she tried to stop me." She gave me a mischievous smile. "I wouldn't really, but it made her give in." I laughed, despite the heaviness in my heart. "You're a Mitchell, all right. Stubborn to the core." Life settled into a new pattern. I promoted Patricia Chen to CEO, while remaining as chairman of the board. The company thrived under her leadership, maintaining our commitment to quality and community while thoughtfully expanding into new markets. The land remained untouched, the Christmas trees growing taller each year. Jessica helped me plant new saplings each spring, learning the patience required to nurture something that wouldn't reach its full potential for decades. David and I maintained a cold distance. He moved to Boston, taking a position with a development firm that specialized in exactly the kind of luxury projects he'd always favored. We spoke only through attorneys regarding company matters affecting his shareholding. Michael graduated from Westfield and went on to an Ivy League university. He sent obligatory cards at Christmas, but rarely visited. I made peace with that loss, understanding that his father's narrative had shaped his perception of me. 3 years after the board meeting that changed everything, I received an unexpected call. David's number appearing on my phone was so unusual that I nearly didn't answer. "Hello?" I said cautiously. "Dad." His voice sounded strange, tense, uncertain. "I need to talk to you in person. It's important. Are you all right?" Despite everything, concern was my first reaction. "Yes, no, I don't know." He sighed heavily. "Can I come to the house tomorrow around noon?" I hesitated only briefly. "Of course." The next day, I waited on the porch, watching as an unfamiliar car came up the long driveway. David had always favored luxury vehicles, Mercedes, BMW, the occasional Porsche. This was a modest Toyota sedan. He parked and emerged looking both familiar and strange. He'd lost weight. His hair had more grey than I remembered. He was only 46, but looked older. "Dad," he nodded as he approached the porch. "David," I gestured to the chair beside me. "Have a seat. Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water?" "No, I'm fine." He sat stiffly, looking out over the property rather than at me. "Place looks the same." "Not entirely. There's a new section of saplings behind the north field. Jessica helped plant them last spring." A flicker of something, pain, regret, crossed his face. "She's a good kid. Smart." "Yes, she is." We sat in uncomfortable silence for a moment. "I've been offered a job," he said finally. "In California, a development firm in San Francisco." "I see. Are you going to take it?" He shrugged. "Probably. There's nothing keeping me here anymore. Sarah's remarried. Michael barely returns my calls. Jessica?" He trailed off. "Well, she still visits me, but it's not the same." I waited, sensing there was more. "Before I go, I wanted to—" He struggled visibly. "I wanted to clear the air. About what happened." "All right," I said neutrally. He finally turned to look at me. I was wrong. About a lot of things. The coastal deal would have been a disaster. They've stripped and gutted every company they've touched. Mitchell Construction would have been just another carcass in their wake. This admission, after 3 years of silence, was unexpected. "What brought you to that conclusion?" "They approached me in Boston, wanted me to help them target other family-owned construction companies, the way they talked about it, like vultures discussing wounded animals." He shook his head. I suddenly saw myself through their eyes, a disgruntled son willing to sell out his family's legacy for a quick payday. It wasn't who I thought I was. The irony might have been satisfying under different circumstances. Instead, it just felt sad. "We all have moments of clarity eventually." "The company's doing well," he said, changing direction. "Patricia's leadership has been impressive. The new headquarters downtown is getting a lot of positive press." "Yes, she's been excellent. The Mitchell Foundation has expanded its scholarship program as well. 20 students this year." David nodded. "I saw the announcement." That's good." Another silence stretched between us. Decades of shared history and 3 years of bitter estrangement created a chasm too wide to bridge in one conversation. "My shares," he said finally. "If I move to California, I want to sell them." This was surprising. His 15% stake in the company was worth considerable money, but it was also his last connection to the Mitchell legacy. "Are you sure? You don't have to decide that now." "I'm sure, but I don't want to sell to just anyone." He took a deep breath. "I want the company to buy them back. Or you. Either way, I want them to stay in the family." The olive branch was small, but significant. "The company can arrange that. Frank can draw up the paperwork." He nodded, seemingly relieved. "There's one more thing. Jessica's college fund. I haven't been able to contribute much since the divorce. Sarah's new husband is wealthy, but I don't trust him to prioritize Jessica's education." "You don't need to worry about that," I assured him. "I've established a trust for Jessica's education. It's completely separate from the company or my estate. It will be there for her regardless of what happens." Relief washed over his face. "Thank you." As he prepared to leave, I found myself asking, "Would you like to stay for lunch? Mrs. Gonzalez made her famous enchiladas." "More than I can eat alone?" He hesitated, then nodded. "I'd like that." Lunch was awkward but civil. We talked mostly about Jessica, safe, common ground. As he was leaving, David paused at his car. "I was wrong about one more thing," he said. "When I said Mom would be ashamed of you, she wouldn't be. She'd have done exactly what you did." "Yes," I agreed quietly, "she would have. I'm sorry, Dad." The words seemed to cost him something to say. Not just for the business stuff, for everything. For not understanding what you and Mom built until it was too late. I nodded, accepting the apology without offering immediate absolution. Some wounds were too deep for quick healing. "Drive safely to Boston." "I will." He hesitated. "I'll let you know about California." "Please do." As his car disappeared down the driveway, I felt a curious mixture of sadness and peace. The relationship was damaged beyond full repair, but perhaps not beyond all healing. It was a start. David did move to California. The company repurchased his shares. We exchanged occasional emails and phone calls. Nothing deep, but civil. He sent me photos of his new condo overlooking the bay. I sent him updates about Jessica's achievements in school. Life continued its steady rhythm. I scaled back my involvement with the company, spending more time on the land I'd fought so hard to preserve. I expanded the workshop, taking on more ambitious projects. I taught woodworking classes at the community center. And then, 5 years after our confrontation in the boardroom, came an unexpected development. Jessica, now 17 and preparing for college, arrived for her regular weekend visit with unusual excitement. "Grandpa!" she called as she bounded up the porch steps. "Guess what? Dad's coming home for my graduation, and he wants to bring someone." "Oh." I tried to match her enthusiasm. "Who's he bringing?" "Her name is Anna. She's a professor at Berkeley. Dad says she's really nice and wants to meet everyone." Jessica's eyes sparkled. "He sounds different when he talks about her. Happier." "That's wonderful," I said sincerely. David deserved happiness, despite our differences. "And there's more." She was practically bouncing. "Dad says he wants us all to have dinner together before graduation. You, me, him, and Anna. He says it's important to him." The prospect was daunting. We hadn't been in the same room for 5 years. But Jessica's hope was too precious to dismiss. "If that's what you want, then of course we'll have dinner." "It is. It really is." She hugged me tightly. "Thank you, Grandpa." The dinner was scheduled for the evening before Jessica's graduation. I suggested a neutral location, an upscale restaurant in Hartford that had been a favorite of Margaret's. As the day approached, I found myself uncharacteristically nervous. What would we talk about? How much awkwardness could one meal sustain? I arrived early, securing our reserved table and ordering a scotch to steady my nerves. At precisely 7, David appeared at the entrance with Jessica and a woman I assumed was Anna. She was about David's age, with short, silver-streaked dark hair and an intelligent face. They approached the table, Jessica practically vibrating with excitement. "Dad!" David nodded as I stood. "David!" I extended my hand, which he shook firmly. "It's good to see you." "You too." He turned slightly. "This is Anna Moretti. Anna, my father, Robert Mitchell." "Mr. Mitchell," she smiled warmly, shaking my hand. "I've heard so much about you. Your company's work on the Hartford Public Library restoration was brilliant." "Thank you," I replied, pleasantly surprised. "Please call me Robert." As we settled into our seats, Jessica between David and me, with Anna on David's other side, the initial tension began to ease. Anna was articulate and engaging, an architectural historian at Berkeley who had met David at a conference on urban development. Their connection was evident in the way they interacted, comfortable, respectful, with genuine affection. More surprising was the change in David himself. He seemed more grounded, less driven by status and appearances. He spoke thoughtfully about his work in California, which focused more on sustainable urban development than luxury properties. "The firm is partnering with the city on affordable housing projects," he explained, using innovative materials and design to create communities that are both economical and dignified. That sounds meaningful, I said, genuinely impressed. A far cry from Evergreen Heights. He winced slightly at the reference, but nodded. Let's just say my priorities have shifted. As dinner progressed, the conversation flowed more naturally. We shared stories about Jessica's accomplishments, discussed her college plans, and even cautiously reminisced about some happier family memories. Anna told amusing anecdotes about academic politics, and I talked about my woodworking projects. During dessert, David cleared his throat. I have something I'd like to say. He looked at Jessica, then at me. Being back here, seeing the changes in the company and Jessica in you, Dad, it's made me realize how much I've missed, how much I threw away because I was too focused on what I thought success should look like. Jessica reached for his hand, squeezing it encouragingly. Anna and I have been discussing our future, he continued. She's been offered a position at Yale, starting next spring. We're considering moving back to Connecticut. This was unexpected. That would put you closer to Jessica when she starts college, I observed. Yes, David agreed, but it's more than that. I've been consulting on sustainable development projects, and there's a need for that expertise here. Mitchell Construction, under Patricia's leadership, has become a leader in the field. I saw where this was heading. You're thinking of approaching the company? He nodded. Not to rejoin in an executive capacity. That ship has sailed, and rightly so, but as a consultant perhaps, if Patricia and the board would consider it. The old Robert Mitchell might have rejected the idea outright, but 5 years had softened some edges. I think that could be worth discussing. Patricia values innovation, especially in sustainable building practices. Relief crossed his face. Thank you. I wasn't sure how you'd react. People change, David. Companies change. That's not always a bad thing. Jessica was beaming, looking between us like she'd just witnessed a miracle. In some ways, perhaps she had. As we were leaving the restaurant, David pulled me aside, while Jessica and Anna walked ahead to the parking lot. There's one more thing, he said quietly. If Anna and I do move back, would it be possible for us to visit the property sometimes? Not to change anything, he added quickly. Just to visit. Anna loves historical homes, and I'd like to show her where I grew up. The request was modest, but its significance was enormous. Of course, I said simply. The door is always open. The graduation ceremony the next day was a blur of emotion and pride. Jessica, valedictorian of her class, gave a speech that had me fumbling for a handkerchief. David and Anna sat beside me in the audience, all of us united in celebration of this remarkable young woman who had somehow bridged the chasm between us. Afterwards, as we gathered for photos, Jessica insisted on one with just David and me on either side of her. As we posed, she whispered, "This is all I wanted, my family together again." It wasn't quite that simple, of course. The wounds of the past hadn't magically healed. But standing there with my son and granddaughter, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Hope for our family's future. David and Anna did move back to Connecticut that fall. He established a consulting practice specializing in sustainable development and occasionally collaborated with Mitchell Construction on projects. Our relationship remained cautious, but gradually warmed. We would never return to what we had been before the betrayal, but we found a new way to be family, more honest. Perhaps more realistic about our flaws and limitations. As for me, I continued to enjoy my semi-retirement. The land remained intact, still growing Christmas trees that fewer people wanted, but that Jessica insisted we maintain. The company thrived under Patricia's leadership. The Mitchell Foundation expanded its reach, supporting education and community development throughout the state. One crisp autumn day, 2 years after Jessica's graduation, I was in my workshop when I heard a vehicle coming up the driveway. Looking out the window, I was surprised to see Jessica's car. She wasn't expected until the weekend. She burst into the workshop with characteristic energy, now a confident college sophomore studying environmental engineering. "Grandpa, you'll never believe what happened." "What's got you so excited?" I asked, setting aside the cabinet door I was sanding. "Dad called me at school. He said to come right away. He has something important to show us." She was practically dancing with excitement. "He said to bring you too. He's at the office." The company office? This was unusual. While David occasionally consulted with Mitchell Construction, he rarely went to headquarters. "Yes, he wouldn't tell me what it's about. Just that it's amazing and we both need to see it right away." Curious despite myself, I cleaned up, changed my shirt, and joined Jessica in her car. The drive to Hartford was filled with her speculation about what David's surprise might be. A new project? An award? A personal announcement? When we arrived at the Mitchell Construction headquarters, a LEED-certified building that had been one of Patricia's first major initiatives as CEO, David was waiting in the lobby. He looked nervous but excited. "You came," he said, seeming genuinely surprised. "Both of you." "Jessica said it was important," I replied. "Is everything all right?" "Better than all right." He led us to the elevator. "But I need to show you rather than tell you." We rode to the roof, where the company had installed a garden and solar array. As we stepped out, I was confused to see a helicopter sitting on the landing pad. Not an unusual sight in itself, as the company occasionally used helicopter transport for remote projects, but strange given the mysterious summons. "What's this about, David?" I asked. He took a deep breath. "Do you remember what you said to me once? About legacy not being measured in dollars, but in moments." I nodded, surprised he remembered that conversation from so long ago. "I've been thinking about that a lot lately, about the kind of legacy I want to leave for Jessica, and someday, maybe, for her children." He gestured to the helicopter. "Mitchell Construction has been developing sustainable building projects in remote areas, places that are hard to reach by conventional means. Patricia mentioned they were considering purchasing a helicopter for site visits and material transport to reduce the environmental impact of building access roads." I was still confused. And I remembered how you built this company, one project at a time, always reinvesting, always thinking long-term." He smiled nervously. "So I bought this helicopter for the company, as a gift." I stared at him, then at the helicopter with the Mitchell Construction logo freshly painted on its side. "You bought a helicopter? It's a Bell 407 GXI. He said. "Fuel-efficient, versatile, perfect for reaching remote construction sites without building access roads that damage ecosystems. The company leases it from my consulting firm at a nominal rate, with all profits going to the Mitchell Foundation Scholarship Fund." I was speechless. It was exactly the kind of long-term, practical investment I would have made in my days as CEO, beneficial for the company, the environment, and the foundation. It showed foresight, responsibility, and commitment to the Mitchell legacy. Jessica squealed and hugged her father. "That's amazing, Dad. Does this mean I get helicopter rides to school?" He laughed. "No, but you might get summer internship opportunities at some very interesting construction sites." I approached the helicopter slowly, running my hand along its sleek exterior. "This is unexpected." "Good unexpected, I hope," David said, coming to stand beside me. "Very good," I agreed. "It's a thoughtful investment in the company's future." "That's high praise, coming from you." His voice softened. "I wanted to show you that I finally understand what you were trying to teach me all those years, that success isn't measured in quick profits or flashy developments. It's built over time, through hard work and thinking beyond yourself." The moment was interrupted by Jessica's phone ringing. She answered, spoke briefly, then turned to us with a grimace. "It's my study group. There's a crisis with our project due tomorrow. I hate to run, but—" "Go!" David and I said simultaneously, then looked at each other in surprise. After she left, an awkward silence fell between us. Standing beside the helicopter, I felt the weight of our complicated history, the betrayal, The confrontation, the years of estrangement, and now this tentative rebuilding. Why a helicopter? I asked finally. Of all the investments you could have made, David smiled ruefully. Remember Michael's 16th birthday? You took us all up in that chartered helicopter to see the Hartford skyline. You pointed out all the buildings Mitchell Construction had built or renovated. I'd never seen the company's impact from that perspective before. How much of the city we'd helped shape. I did remember. It had been an impulse, a grandparent's indulgence. I hadn't realized it had made such an impression. I wanted to recreate that moment for future generations of the Mitchell family, David continued, so they can see what we built together. The legacy that almost got lost because I was too short-sighted to value it. The words "we built together" hung in the air between us. Despite everything, we were still father and son, still connected by blood, history, and now, perhaps, a renewed appreciation for the legacy we shared. Would you like to take it up? David gestured to the helicopter. The pilot standing by. We could see how the old neighborhood looks from above. I hesitated only briefly. I'd like that very much. As we rose above the city, banking gently over the skyscrapers and historic buildings that bore the invisible fingerprints of Mitchell Construction, I felt a sense of completion. The company would continue beyond me. The land would remain protected, and somehow, against all odds, the family had found its way back to solid ground. Look there! I pointed to a cluster of buildings near the river. The hospital expansion we built the year you were born. And over there, the university library that won us our first major award. David nodded, following my gaze. And there's the elementary school we renovated when Jessica was starting kindergarten. We built more than I realized, I said softly, seeing decades of work spread out below us. Yes, we did, David agreed. And not just buildings. As the helicopter banked toward home, I thought about the journey that had brought us here. Not just the physical distance from the ground below, but the emotional terrain we'd traversed, from betrayal to tentative forgiveness, from estrangement to cautious reconciliation. And I thought about Jessica's face when she saw her father and grandfather standing together beside the helicopter, the simple joy of family restored, however imperfectly. Perhaps that was the most important thing we'd built after all. 3 weeks later, Michael called me for the first time in years. "Grandpa," he said, his voice uncertain, "Dad told me about the helicopter. That's pretty cool." "It is," I agreed, carefully neutral. "Your father made a wise investment in the company's future." A pause. "Dad says you guys are talking again." Actually talking, not just being polite at Jessica's events. "We're finding our way back to some common ground," I acknowledged. Another pause, longer this time. "I've been thinking, I'm coming home for Thanksgiving. Maybe I could stop by. See the old place?" Something warm unfurled in my chest. "I'd like that very much, Michael. The door is always open." "Cool." I could hear the relief in his voice. "And maybe you could tell me some stories. About when Dad was a kid. About the company and stuff." "I have plenty of stories," I promised. "And your grandmother's apple pie recipe, if you're interested. No one's made it since she passed." "I'd like that," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "Thanks, Grandpa." As I hung up, I gazed out the window at the land that had almost torn our family apart. The trees swayed gently in the autumn breeze, their roots deep in soil that held decades of Mitchell history. They would continue growing long after I was gone, perhaps providing shade for Jessica's children someday, or even Michael's. The legacy wasn't in the buildings we constructed or the land we preserved, though those mattered. It wasn't even in the company that bore our name. The true legacy was in the moments we shared, the lessons we taught each other, sometimes painfully, and the bonds that, while they could be stretched and strained, had proven stronger than even I had believed possible. "You were right, Margaret," I said softly to the empty room, imagining my wife's approving smile. "Legacy isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in moments, And somehow, against all odds, we were building new moments together. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left.